Welcome back, vintage camera lovers, to another nostalgic tour of the early days of digital imaging, which today takes us back to 1997, when Canon launched the PowerShot 350, sporting 1/3 of a megapixel and a tilting screen. According to Canon's official museum, this was their fourth PowerShot camera, albeit since two of those were actually just PC card models, it was arguably only their second digital compact camera with a conventional design. Their first was the PowerShot 600 from 1996, a surprisingly chunky model, which I've previously made a video about if you're interested. 1 year later though, the PowerShot 350 represented a considerable change in design, and in fact looking at subsequent models, it's an outlier in the series. Now this is because Canon didn't actually make the PowerShot 350, instead it's based on the Panasonic VZ XP1 launched to the Comdex show 1 year earlier in 1996. This in turn became an OEM model for both Canon and I believe Konica. Now it wasn't unusual during the early days of digital cameras for even the biggest names in the industry to share components or even rebrand entire models from other companies as they found their feet in the market. Preceding the later PowerShot A, G, S and Pro series, the 350 was a one-off, a gap filler to test the market, and one that's quite hard to find today. I had a saved search on eBay for several years before one finally popped up in what looked like reasonable condition. As always, it was sold as untested, and after some haggling I bagged it for £32 or around $40. That's roughly 10 times less than its original launch price of about 70,000 yen. So let's take it out 28 years later to see how it performs. The PowerShot 350 departs from a traditional horizontal camera design to become a taller shape, in this case almost square shaped when viewed face on. Fujifilm adopted a similar approach for their MX series launched in 1998, such as the MX700 seen here on the right. The 350 measures 90mm wide by 94mm tall and 40mm thick at the thinnest point, bulging out to 50mm on the grip. It's pretty light at 290 grams without batteries, but fit the three AA's which power it and it benefits from a bit more heft. It's fairly comfortable to hold with a mild grip on the front and a small indentation for your thumb on the rear, although the shiny plastic surface can feel a little bit slippery. The front surface is home to a shiny shutter release with a click but no half press, a slightly fiddly lever to open the battery compartment, the built-in flash, and in the corner the lens, labelled as 6mm 2.8. In 35mm or full frame terms, this is a fixed lens equivalent to about 43mm, delivering a natural standard field of view. The top panel is completely bare, so let's move on to the left hand side where you'll find a lever to set the lens between normal and macro focusing distances. The standard focusing range is 70cm to infinity, while sliding it to macro will allow it to focus as close as 3cm from the subject. At first, I assumed the lever would either set the camera to standard or macro mode, just two settings, but it actually operates as a continuous manual focusing mechanism, smoothly adjusting the focusing distance from infinity down to 3cm. Slide it all the way down to the maximum macro and it'll only deliver a sharp image from about 3cm away. So if your subject is say 5 or 20cm away, you're going to need to adjust the lever to a midpoint until the image looks sharp on the screen. Behind a single flap are two ports, a digital output that's used with the supplied serial cables for either PCs or Macs, and a 6V DC input for use with the AC adapter. On the right hand side, behind the grip, is the battery compartment, with the PowerShot 350 powered by three AA batteries. Canon supplies a set of NiCads which are charged inside the camera when the AC adapter is plugged in, although you can alternatively power the camera from the mains adapter, or of course use disposable alkalines instead. Canon proudly states these three power sources as a headline feature, although fast forward to the present day and nickel metal hydride rechargeables represent a fourth option. On the underside, you'll find a second of those headline features, a slot with support for thoroughly modern Type 1 compact flash memory cards, considerably smaller and today more convenient than the PC cards employed by the original PowerShot 600. Canon supplies a 2MB card, good for 11 to 47 images depending on the quality setting, but also sells larger 4 and 15MB cards. And finally, turning to the rear, a busy array of buttons and switches above and to the side of the 1.8-inch screen. Believe it or not, this is Canon's first PowerShot with a built-in screen, and in the absence of an optical viewfinder, it's exclusively used for composition as well as playback. Note the small wheel to the right which adjusts the screen brightness. Impressively, the screen also angles up by around 40 degrees, allowing easier composition at low angles. Also note the fairly low frame rate and lagginess, although it is possible to frame up if your subject's not moving too fast. As for the controls, there's no fewer than 10 buttons towards the top, including white balance, exposure compensation, flash and self-timer modes. The white balance button toggles between auto and custom. Meanwhile, the NP multi button allows you to switch the camera into a negative mode, which, coupled with the close focusing capabilities, allows you, in theory, to capture and reverse frames of negative film, at least with an appropriate mount. Meanwhile, the multi-mode displays 4 or 16 thumbnails in playback if you prefer. Note the speed of readout from the card. To the right of the screen are 3 switches and a dial. The first powers the camera on and off with a short push. The second sets it between recording photos and playing them back. Next comes a slightly fiddly dial to adjust the screen brightness, while below this is a 3-position switch setting the photo quality between fine, normal and economy. The resolution stays the same between them, it's just the compression level. Everything is operated by these buttons and switches alone with no screen-based menu system. At the heart of the camera lies a 1/3 inch type CCD sensor sporting 350,000 pixels, or in other words, roughly 1/3 of a megapixel. This delivers images with a maximum resolution of 640 by 480 pixels, or as it's known in PC terms, VGA. Canon quotes the sensitivity as being 120 ISO, and the shutter range as 1/4 to 2,000th of a second, but the exposures on this camera are completely automatic, with the only manual control being compensation to deliberately brighten or darken the image. There's 4 settings on either side. Files are recorded as JPEGs only, again with 3 compression options. Given the same scene, the economy, normal, and fine modes generated files measuring 31, 70 and 145 kilobytes respectively. Fast forward 28 years now, I had high hopes I'd be able to get the 350 working with minimal effort. After all, it used AA batteries for power and compact flash cards for memory, both of which are readily available today. But opening the battery compartment revealed why the camera was described as untested and why the seller hadn't provided additional pictures. The terminals were green with corrosion, probably from a previous battery leak, and refused to make electrical contact. Luckily though, all is not lost, as a variety of treatments can be used to clean the terminals, or at least remove sufficient corrosion for them to work again. I found a little WD-40 squirted onto a cotton wool bud or a Q-tip could rub off the worst of the corrosion, and while some was still remaining, the camera could at least now power up with my Eneloop rechargeable batteries. Vinegar may also be used to dissolve more of the corrosion if desired. My 350 was sold with the original 2MB memory card, but since this was only good for 11 best quality images, I swapped it for a 32MB card from a later model, which worked just fine. Oh, and suffice it to say, I did not bother with a serial cable connection to an age-appropriate PC running the required software. Instead, I just used a USB compact flash card reader on my MacBook. Easy. Now I was good to go, so before wrapping up, here's my traditional slideshow of photos taken in the present day. Note that there are no video clips as this camera didn't have that capability. I'll see you in a minute. Canon's PowerShot 350 arrived in the late 90s into a melting pot of digital cameras. At this point, no one really knew how they should look or even if or when they'd represent a true alternative to film. In a rush to test demand, many manufacturers turned to other companies to get their products onto the shelves sooner rather than later, with minimal commitment. Canon may have been an imaging giant, but the PowerShot 350 was actually based on a model made by Panasonic. Either way, it was a substantial step up over their first consumer compact, the original PowerShot 600. Not only was it considerably smaller and better looking, but it featured a screen, took standard AA batteries, and recorded onto much more convenient compact flash memory cards. But image quality was improving fast at this point, and the 3rd megapixel sensor quickly became outdated, with models arriving soon after sporting a whole megapixel or even more. Just 1 year after the PowerShot 350, Canon's 3rd consumer model more than doubled the resolution, but crucially presented a homegrown design that's still recognisable today. This PowerShot A5 set a standard for Canon compacts going forward, inspired by the earlier film Ixus cameras and influencing the style of the future S series, not to mention the first digital Ixus models. These were true brand ambassadors for Canon. As such though, the original PowerShot 350 and 600 have mostly become footnotes in Canon's early digital camera history, filling a gap until there was greater demand, or at least until their manufacturing had spun up to produce their own homegrown models. Today, they're both interesting cameras for collectors, and the 350's close focusing capabilities certainly set it apart from the crowd, although I personally did find it quite hard to nail the focus on that low resolution laggy screen, plus the live view has quite a low frame rate. If you're looking for a more usable, everyday vintage digital camera from Canon, I'd consider something from their more recent PowerShot A, S or G series from a few years later. But if you're after something a bit more unusual, the 350 will certainly turn some heads, and for collectors will represent a unique moment in Canon's digital camera development. And that's it for another trip down memory stick lane. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I'd love to hear about your first digital cameras and your journey to the models that you use today. And if you enjoy these videos and you'd like to support my channel, please do consider subscribing with notifications mind, and check out as many of my other old videos as you can. Well, that's your evening sorted. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.